What happens when a multi-billion-dollar airline industry collides with the unbreakable will of one woman who was pushed too far? This isn't a story about a disgruntled passenger. It's the account of a titan of industry, a black female CEO who single-handedly brought an airline to its knees. She wasn't asking for an apology. She was demanding a revolution. After a security guard at JFK International Airport spat the words, "We don't trust people like you," he didn't just insult a woman. He ignited a firestorm that would ground fleets, topple executives, and expose a rotten core of prejudice hidden in plain sight. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 hummed with its usual chaotic symphony. The rhythmic clatter of rolling suitcases, the cacophony of final boarding calls, and the murmur of 1,000 different journeys blending into one ambient roar. For Dr. Imani Cole, it was a familiar sound, the background music to a life lived at 30,000 feet. Dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue pantsuit that spoke of quiet power rather than loud wealth, she moved with an unhurried grace that set her apart from the frantic energy around her. Imani was the founder and CEO of AeroLease Dynamics, a name that didn't mean much to the average traveler, but was whispered with a mixture of awe and fear in airline boardrooms worldwide. Her company didn't fly passengers. It owned the wings they flew on. AeroLease Dynamics was one of the largest private aircraft leasing corporations on the planet, with a portfolio of over 300 state-of-the-art jets. An airline's success or failure could hinge on securing a contract with her. Today she was flying Transatlantic Airways, one of her biggest clients, to London for a final sign-off on a new 20-plane lease agreement. It was a deal worth nearly $3 billion. Her first-class ticket should have afforded her a seamless journey through the priority security lane. But a burly, middle-aged security officer named Frank Gallagher stepped in front of her. His arm held out like a barrier. "I'm going to need you to step over here for additional screening, ma'am," he said, his tone flat and devoid of politeness. His eyes, small and resentful, raked over her from her expensive leather briefcase to her simple but elegant pearl earrings. Imani, accustomed to the occasional, random check that seemed to find her more often than her white male counterparts, simply nodded. Of course, but this felt different. Frank didn't direct her to the usual area. He led her to a sterile, glass-walled cubicle off to the side, a place that felt more like an interrogation room than a security checkpoint. He instructed her to place her carry-on and briefcase on the steel table. "Empty them. Everything out," he commanded. Imani complied, her movements deliberate and calm as she unpacked her laptop, a binder of confidential contracts, a toiletry bag, and a novel. Frank picked up the binder, his thick fingers flipping through pages of complex financial projections and legal clauses he couldn't possibly understand. "What is this?" he grunted, holding it up as if it were contraband. "Those are confidential business documents," Imani said, her voice remaining steady, though a cold knot was beginning to form in her stomach. "Please be careful with them," he scoffed, tossing the binder back on the table with a careless thud. He then unzipped her toiletry bag, pulling out her travel-sized moisturizer and shampoo, scrutinizing them under the harsh fluorescent light. It was no longer a security check. It was a performance of dominance, a deliberate act of humiliation. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his questions becoming more like an accusation. "London. For business." What kind of business? Imani's patience, a resource she usually possessed in abundance, began to fray. "That is a private matter. I've already been through the primary scanner. I have a valid ticket and identification. Is there a specific threat you've identified? Frank's lips curled into a sneer. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, venomous growl. The threat I see is people like you, coming in here with your fancy clothes and your expensive bags, thinking you own the place. We have procedures to follow. We don't trust people like you in this part of the airport. The words hung in the sterile air, sharp and poisonous. People like you. It wasn't about her briefcase or her destination. It was about the color of her skin. In that single moment, Dr. Imani Cole, the titan of aviation, the brilliant strategist who could negotiate multi-billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, was reduced to a stereotype in the eyes of this man. For a long moment, she said nothing. The ambient noise of the terminal faded away. All she could hear was the blood pounding in her ears. But when she finally spoke, her voice was not loud or angry. It was chillingly quiet, honed to a razor's edge. "I see," she said softly. "And who exactly is we?" Before Frank could answer his supervisor, a harried-looking man named Walter Finch, with a name tag that read, "Lead TSA Officer," bustled over, drawn by the tense silence. "Is there a problem here, Frank?" he asked, his eyes darting between his subordinate and the impeccably dressed woman standing with an unnerving stillness. "Just doing my job?" Walt Frank grumbled. Subject was being uncooperative. Imani turned her gaze to Walter. It was like staring into the barrel of a gun. "Your officer has just informed me that I, quote, cannot be trusted because I am, in his words, a person like you. He has performed a search that went far beyond protocol and has insinuated that my presence here is a threat. I would like your name and his name, and I would like to know what you intend to do about it. Now." Walter blanched. This was not the standard complaint about a long wait or a confiscated water bottle. He tried to placate her with a practiced bureaucratic smile. "Ma'am, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Officer Gallagher is one of our most thorough agents. Sometimes, in the interest of security, our methods can seem intrusive." "There is no misunderstanding," Imani stated, her voice like ice. He was not being thorough. He was being prejudiced. "I am asking you again. What are you going to do about it?" Walter's smile faltered. He glanced at Frank, who stood there defiant and unrepentant. The path of least resistance was clear. Manage the situation. Apologize superficially and get this woman on her plane before she made a bigger scene. "Frank, that's enough. Let the passenger repack her belongings," Walter said, then turned back to Imani. "Ma'am, on behalf of the TSA, I apologize if you felt singled out. We value all passengers equally. You are free to go." Free to go. As if he were granting her a pardon. He hadn't addressed the core issue. He had dismissed her, protected his own, and hoped she would just disappear into the crowd. Imani slowly, methodically began to place her items back into her briefcase. She snapped it shut with a definitive click. She looked from Walter's weak, evasive face to Frank's smug, hateful one. She had built an empire on the principle that actions have consequences. She lived by a code that demanded respect not as a privilege, but as a baseline for any and all interaction. That all had just been violated in the most fundamental way. She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten to sue. She simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of agreement. It was a nod of decision. "Thank you for clarifying your position," she said, the words carrying a weight that neither man could comprehend. She turned and walked away, not towards her gate, but back towards the terminal entrance. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The line had not just been crossed, it had been drawn in the sand. And Dr. Imani Cole was about to unleash a tsunami. The moment Imani stepped out from the oppressive atmosphere of the security area and into the main concourse, the mask of calm composure remained, but her mind was a whirlwind of cold, precise fury. She walked past the duty-free shops and bustling restaurants, ignoring the siren call of her flight to London, now flashing boarding on the departure screens. Her destination was a quiet corner near an arrivals gate where she pulled out her phone. She didn't call her lawyer. She didn't call a publicist. She called Olivia Chen, her fiercely loyal and hyper-competent chief operating officer. Olivia picked up on the first ring. "Dr. Cole," Olivia said, her voice crisp. "I trust you're settling in for your flight. The London team is on standby for your arrival." "Change of plans." Olivia Imani said, her tone devoid of any emotion. "Initiate code." "Midnight." There was a half-second of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Code Midnight was a theoretical protocol, a nuclear option so extreme they had only ever wargamed it. It was the master switch to begin the systematic, legally fortified process of grounding every single aircraft leased to a particular client. It was a declaration of corporate war. Code Midnight. Olivia repeated, her voice now laced with disbelief and concern. "Against whom? Transatlantic Airways?" Imani stated. "All of them. Effective immediately." Imani. "What happened?" Olivia asked, dropping the formal title. "The London deal is today. Grounding their fleet will cost us millions in penalties, not to mention the diplomatic fallout. It will incinerate our relationship with them forever." "Our relationship with them is already over," Imani replied. "They just don't know it yet. I am at JFK. I was subjected to a degrading and racially motivated search by airport security. Their supervisor endorsed the behavior. This airport, this airline's hub, has demonstrated that my safety and dignity are conditional. Therefore, I can no longer guarantee the operational integrity of my assets under their purview." Her language was corporate, but the message was deeply personal. "If I am not safe, my property is not safe. Send the initial notice to Transatlantic's CEO, Richard Sterling. Use the pre-approved template for catastrophic contract breach. Cite Section 11 subsection B of our master lease agreement. Failure of the lessee to guarantee a secure and non-discriminatory operational environment for lessor's personnel and assets." We're invoking it. All 25 of our aircraft, currently in their fleet, are to be grounded upon landing at their next destination. No exceptions. All maintenance support software updates and parts provisions from AeroLease Dynamics are suspended effective 1 hour from now. "My God," Olivia whispered, the sheer scale of the order sinking in. Their entire long-haul fleet. The A350s, the 787s. It will cripple them in hours. "That is the intention," Imani said coldly. "I am on my way back to the city. I want our legal and PR teams assembled for a briefing in 2 hours. Get it done, Olivia. Consider it done." Olivia replied, her voice now shifting from shock to steel. She knew better than to question Imani once a decision of this magnitude was made. Meanwhile, in his lavish Manhattan corner office, Richard Sterling, CEO of Transatlantic Airways, was enjoying a mid-afternoon espresso. He was a man who cultivated an image of effortless control with silver hair a tailored suit, and a perpetual tan. He was smugly reviewing the projected profits from the new deal with AeroLease Dynamics when an urgent email flagged critical from his legal department landed in his inbox. He opened it, read the first paragraph, and choked on his coffee. Pursuant to Section 11B of the Master Lease Agreement, AeroLease Dynamics hereby gives notice of immediate suspension of all services and demands the grounding of all leased assets. He read it again. It had to be a mistake, a typo, a prank. He buzzed his assistant. "Get Beatrice Hayes from legal in here." Now Beatrice, a sharp, no-nonsense corporate lawyer, walked in, holding a tablet, her face grim. "You saw it then?" "What in God's name is this?" "Beatrice Richard," boomed his face, turning a blotchy red. "Code, Midnight, Section 11. B. That's for a war zone or a total collapse of air traffic control, not for a Tuesday afternoon. Is this a joke?" "It's no joke, Richard," Beatrice said, her voice tight. "The notification is legally sound. I've just had a junior associate on the phone with their legal team. They confirmed it. The order came directly from Imani Cole herself. They say she invoked the clause due to a security and discrimination incident involving her personally at JFK. Richard stared at her, utterly bewildered. A discrimination incident. One of our passengers had a bad experience with the TSA, and now she's trying to bankrupt us. Who is this woman? She's not just a passenger, Richard Beatrice corrected him sternly. She's Dr. Imani Cole. She is AeroLease Dynamics. She owns the planes. All 25 of them, including the 10 new A350s that are the backbone of our international routes. The color drained from Richard's face. The reality of the situation crashed down on him. This wasn't some entitled customer he could placate with a flight voucher and a canned apology. This was the woman who held the keys to his kingdom. His phone rang. It was the director of operations at JFK. "Richard, we have a problem," the man said, his voice frantic. "AeroLease has just remotely locked out our access to the maintenance diagnostics for Flight 7 currently en route from LA. They've informed us that upon landing, the aircraft will be considered non-operational. They're doing it to all of them." "Richard, what the hell is going on?" Richard's carefully constructed world was beginning to fracture. He had built his career on managing perceptions on smooth-talking investors and crushing unions. He viewed customers as data points, complaints, as statistical noise. He had never encountered a force like Imani Cole, a single individual with the power to turn his multi-billion-dollar airline into a flock of expensive, useless statues on the tarmac. "Get me on the phone with her," he snarled at Beatrice. "I don't care what you have to do. Get me Imani Cole. We're going to fix this." But as Beatrice soon discovered, Dr. Imani Cole was not taking his calls. She was not interested in fixing it. She was interested in dismantling it. The first wave of cancellations had just been posted. The chaos had begun. The first sign of the apocalypse for the traveling public came not as a bang, but as a notification, a quiet ping on 1,000 phones. Your transatlantic airways flight TA-1101 to Paris has been cancelled due to unforeseen operational issues. Please see a gate agent for rebooking options. At first, it was just one flight, then another, and another. Within 3 hours, a cascade of cancellations swept across Transatlantic's global network. London, Tokyo, Dubai, Los Angeles. Every route that relied on the sleek, fuel-efficient aircraft from AeroLease Dynamics went dark. The term operational issues was a laughably inadequate euphemism for the corporate earthquake shaking the airline to its foundations. At JFK, LAX, and London Heathrow, chaos erupted. Lines at transatlantic ticket counters swelled into angry, confused mobs. Gate agents with no information and no solutions faced a rising tide of fury. The airline's social media pages were a dumpster fire of outrage. The stock market, ever sensitive to the scent of blood in the water, reacted instantly. Transatlantic's stock TTA began to plummet in after-hours trading. In the emergency boardroom at AeroLease Dynamics, Imani Cole stood before a massive screen displaying a world map. Red dots blinked over dozens of cities. The fleet is being secured. Olivia Chen reported, pointing to the map. Flight 7 from LA has landed at JFK and has been remotely disabled. Our ground crew is en route to secure the asset. Flight 12 from London is landing in Boston in 20 minutes. Same protocol. The European fleet will be grounded within the next 6 hours. Transatlantic is hemorrhaging money by the second. Imani nodded, her expression unreadable. This wasn't about money. It was about principle. Every cancelled flight, every furious passenger, every panicked call to the airline was a direct consequence of the words spoken by Frank Gallagher in that sterile glass box. He had thought he was putting a single woman in her place. He had no idea he was toppling an empire. Back at Transatlantic's headquarters, Richard Sterling was in a full-blown panic. His attempts to reach Imani Cole were met with a polite but impenetrable wall in the form of Olivia Chen, who repeatedly informed his office that Dr. Cole is unavailable, but will review any written correspondence you wish to send. Written correspondence, he roared, throwing a pen across his office. Our airline is on fire, and she wants me to write her a letter. She's making a point, Richard said. Beatrice Hayes, who was now coordinating a frantic damage control effort. She's taken away your power, and now she's refusing to let you use your usual tactics. You can't charm her. You can't bully her. You have to play by her rules. Finally, swallowing his pride, Richard dictated a formal, groveling apology, offering to fly to New York immediately to personally apologize for the unacceptable lapse in service standards she experienced. He offered a lifetime of free first-class travel, a significant donation to a charity of her choice, anything to stop the bleeding. An hour later, a reply came. It was not from Imani. It was from Olivia. Dr. Cole acknowledges your apology. However, this issue is not a matter of customer service and cannot be rectified with compensation. The core of this dispute is the systemic failure of your operational partner at JFK to provide a safe and professional environment, a failure your organization is vicariously liable for. Dr. Cole will only speak with you directly once you have provided a detailed, actionable plan to address the root cause of the incident. This must include, but is not limited to, the immediate and permanent termination of the employment of the 2 officers involved. Richard stared at the email. Terminate TSA agents. He didn't have that power. It was a federal agency. She had to know that. She was giving him an impossible task. She's cornered us, Beatrice said grimly. She knows we can't fire federal employees. She's not asking for a solution. She's highlighting our powerlessness. This is about humiliating us. No, Richard said, a flicker of understanding cutting through his anger. It's not about humiliation. It's a test. She wants to see what we'll do when faced with an impossible problem. Will we throw our hands up, or will we burn down everything in our path to fix it? He picked up the phone and called the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, the body that operates JFK. Then he called the regional head of the TSA. He was no longer the charming CEO. He was a desperate man, fighting for his company's life. The conversations were tense. The initial response from both agencies was defensive and bureaucratic. They spoke of union rules, federal employment protections, and the need for a formal investigation that could take weeks. Weeks, Richard screamed into the phone at the TSA director. "I don't have weeks, I have hours. Your people have lit a fire, and my airline is burning. You will hand over the agents involved, or I will hold a press conference and name your agency as the sole reason for the biggest airline catastrophe in a decade. I will sue you, the Port Authority, and anyone else I can find for gross negligence. You have no idea who you've messed with." The threats born of sheer desperation finally broke through the bureaucratic wall. The agencies agreed to an immediate, expedited review. They would pull the CCTV footage and interview the officers that night. Richard finally got his wish. Olivia Chen called back and informed him that Dr. Cole would grant him a video conference in 1 hour. When Imani's face appeared on the large screen in his boardroom, she looked as composed as if she were about to discuss the weather. There were no visible signs of the fury that had unleashed this storm. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice even, "you have my attention." "Dr. Cole, Imani." Richard started trying to inject a tone of weary camaraderie into his voice. "This has all been a catastrophic misunderstanding. The actions of those individuals were appalling, and I am personally deeply sorry for what you endured. We are working with the authorities to ensure they are held accountable." "Accountability is a good start," Richard Imani said, her eyes unwavering. "But it is not the solution. Your company chose to operate out of a hub where the security culture is so toxic that an officer felt comfortable telling a black woman, your largest business partner, that he didn't trust her kind. His supervisor then ratified that sentiment by dismissing my concerns. This is not about two men. It's about the environment you condone by your presence and your dollars. My problem is not just with them. It's with you." "What do you want?" Richard asked, the desperation raw in his voice. "Just tell me what it will take to get your planes back in the air." Imani leaned forward slightly, and for the first time a flicker of the fire within was visible in her eyes. "I want you to understand," she said. "I want you to understand that dignity is not a negotiable asset. I want you to tear down the system that allowed this to happen and build a new one. A vague promise of retraining is not enough. Firing 2 men is not enough. I want a revolution in how you and your partners police your space. Until I see proof of that, your planes will stay on the ground. And if I don't see it soon, I will repossess every last one of them and lease them to your competitors." The call ended. Richard Sterling. The master of the universe slumped in his chair, defeated. He had been given his ultimatum. It wasn't about apologies or money. It was about tearing down a mountain. And he had no idea where to even begin. The pressure Richard Sterling exerted on the Port Authority and the TSA was immense. Faced with a multi-billion-dollar corporate war erupting on their turf, the bureaucratic gears that usually ground along at a glacial pace suddenly kicked into overdrive. Walter Finch and Frank Gallagher were immediately suspended pending a full investigation. The CCTV footage from the security checkpoint was pulled and reviewed by a panel of senior officials within hours. The video was damning. It showed Imani Cole's calm compliance. It showed Frank Gallagher's escalating aggression, the invasive and unnecessary search of her belongings. his body language reeking of contempt. While the camera had no audio, the visual narrative was irrefutable. It culminated in the tense confrontation with Walter Finch, whose dismissive hand gestures and placating posture clearly communicated one thing. He was managing a problem, not correcting an injustice. The footage confirmed Imani's story completely, but the real bombshell was yet to come. As news of the suspensions circulated among the JFK security staff, a young officer named Kevin Russo found himself at a crossroads. Kevin was in his late 20s, had been on the job for 3 years, and still believed in the principles of serving the public. He had witnessed Frank Gallagher's behavior before. He'd seen the extra scrutiny applied to people of color, the snide remarks muttered under his breath, the complaints from travelers that Walter Finch always managed to make disappear in a flurry of paperwork and procedural jargon. Kevin had been working at a neighboring checkpoint when the incident with Dr. Cole occurred. He had seen her walk away, not with the tearful anger of a wronged tourist, but with the chilling resolve of a general planning a war. He knew this was different. That evening, consumed by guilt and a sense of duty, Kevin Russo made a decision. He used a secure anonymous email address and sent a message to the general contact form on the AeroLease Dynamics website. He marked it for the attention of the legal department. The email read, "To whom it may concern. I am a TSA officer at JFK. I am writing to you about the incident involving Dr. Cole. What happened to her was not an isolated event. Officer Frank Gallagher has a documented history of profiling. I personally have witnessed at least 5 similar incidents. More importantly, lead officer Walter Finch has deliberately covered them up. He calls it de-escalating and managing personnel. But it's a cover-up. He buries the complaints to keep his unit's record clean. There is a file, a digital folder on his local drive labeled Incident Reviews, pending. It's not pending. It's where he hides complaints he doesn't want to officially report. Look for it. What happened to Dr. Cole is a symptom of a systemic protected rot. She was just the first person with enough power to fight back." The email landed like a tactical strike in the AeroLease war room. Olivia Chen immediately forwarded it to Imani and their head of security, a former FBI cybercrimes expert. Within minutes, the information was passed without revealing the source to Richard Sterling's legal team, with a simple chilling message. "We have credible information that a pattern of misconduct and a subsequent cover-up exists within the JFK TSA leadership. We advise you to look for a hidden file of buried complaints." For Beatrice Hayes, this was the key she desperately needed. It shifted the narrative from a he said, she said incident involving 2 rogue officers to a provable case of systemic corruption and a deliberate conspiracy to hide wrongdoing. Armed with this new information, she and the Port Authority's lawyers confronted the TSA leadership with an ultimatum of their own. Either they produce this file, or Transatlantic would file a massive federal lawsuit citing a criminal cover-up, and they would leak the whistleblower's allegation to the press. The threat worked. A forensics team was dispatched to Walter Finch's office computer. Within an hour, they found it. The folder was exactly where the whistleblower said it would be. It contained 12 other complaints filed over 2 years, all against Frank Gallagher, and all eerily similar. They came from a black doctor, a Latino lawyer, an Arab student, all people Frank had deemed like you. Each file contained a cursory note from Finch, concluding with resolved, no further action. No action had ever been taken. The discovery changed everything. This was no longer just about Imani Cole. This was about a dozen other people who had been humiliated and dismissed their voices silenced by a corrupt supervisor. Imani, upon being briefed, knew this was the turning point. She instructed her PR team to leak the information anonymously to a single, highly respected investigative journalist at the New York Times. The next morning, the story exploded. The headline ran across the top of the Times website: JFK Security in Crisis. Whistleblower alleges racial profiling and cover-up at heart of airline shutdown. The article laid out the entire story in devastating detail. It told of Dr. Imani Cole, the powerful black CEO, and her stand against transatlantic. But now it had the damning context of the buried files, the pattern of abuse, and the systemic failure. The narrative had been supercharged. It was now a national scandal about racism, abuse of power, and corporate complicity. The hashtag JFK scandal trended globally. For Frank Gallagher and Walter Finch, it was the end. They were no longer just suspended. They were the faces of a national disgrace. Their names and their actions were being dissected on every news channel. The shield of bureaucracy had been shattered. For Richard Sterling, the story was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gave him the ammunition he needed to force radical change. On the other, it painted his airline, Transatlantic, as the company that did business with and was therefore complicit in this rotten system. His initial hesitation and attempts to smooth things over now looked weak and morally bankrupt in the harsh light of the full story. The court of public opinion was now in session, and the verdict was brutal. His leadership was not just being questioned, it was being condemned. The fallout from the New York Times story was swift and merciless. What had been a corporate dispute became a public crucifixion. The carefully managed images of the TSA as protectors and Transatlantic Airways as a premier global carrier were torn to shreds overnight. The first heads to roll were the most obvious. Frank Gallagher and Walter Finch were fired. The official termination notice from the TSA cited gross misconduct and dereliction of duty. But their punishment didn't end there. The Port Authority Police Department, under immense pressure, announced it was opening a criminal investigation into Walter Finch for obstruction and falsifying official reports. Frank Gallagher faced a slew of civil lawsuits as lawyers representing the other 12 victims from his hidden file came forward, their cases now bolstered by the public record and the whistleblower's confirmation. The two men who had been cloaked in the authority of their uniforms just days before were now pariahs, their careers and reputations irrevocably destroyed. The security firm that held the primary contract for Terminal 4 Global Secure Solutions, a company that prided itself on its rigorous standards, was eviscerated. The Port Authority announced an emergency review of their billion-dollar contract. Within a week, it was cancelled. The financial hit was catastrophic, sending shockwaves through the private security industry. But the most dramatic reckoning was happening inside the glass tower of Transatlantic Airways. The board of directors, a collection of old money investors and ruthless financiers, was furious. They cared little for the morality of the situation, but they cared immensely about the stock price, which had entered a free fall, wiping out over $1 billion in shareholder value. They saw Richard Sterling not as a leader managing a crisis, but as the architect of their financial ruin. His initial dismissal of Imani's complaint, his delay in taking it seriously, his failure to grasp the magnitude of the person he was dealing with, it was all laid bare in an emergency board meeting. "You treated her like a common, disgruntled passenger," Richard bellowed a formidable board member, a hedge fund manager named Marcus Thorne. "You had a chance to get ahead of this to show immediate, decisive action. Instead, you tried to buy her off with flight vouchers and a hollow apology. Your instincts failed. You underestimated your opponent, and in doing so, you have exposed this entire company to unprecedented financial and reputational damage. Beatrice Hayes, present to give a legal briefing, could only watch as the man she worked for was systematically dismantled. Richard tried to defend himself, arguing he had forced the TSA's hand, that he had uncovered the corruption. You didn't uncover anything, another board member shot back. Dr. Cole handed it to you on a silver platter. She played you from the beginning. She provoked a crisis, then gave you the tools to solve it all while making you look incompetent and weak. She has run circles around you, Richard, and the world has been watching. The vote was unanimous. A press release was drafted. Richard Sterling was stepping down as CEO of Transatlantic Airways, effective immediately to pursue other opportunities. It was the corporate equivalent of being thrown out of a moving car. His reign built on arrogance, and image had been brought down by a single, principled stand. The airline was now a ship without a captain, sinking in a sea of red ink and public condemnation. Their planes were still grounded. Their brand was toxic. They were on their knees, broken and desperate. They had followed Imani's instructions. The guilty parties were gone, the corrupt system exposed. But it hadn't been enough. The planes remained on the tarmac. Dr. Imani Cole had demonstrated what happened when they failed her test. Now the entire industry was watching to see what, if anything, could possibly bring them back from the brink. The power was not with the board, the new interim CEO, or the federal government. It remained exactly where it had been from the moment she walked out of that airport, in the hands of the woman they had wronged. She had proven their system was broken. Now she would decide if it was worth rebuilding. In the wake of Richard Sterling's ouster, the Transatlantic Board made a savvy if desperate move. They bypassed the expected male heirs apparent and appointed Diane Morrison as interim CEO. Diane was the former chief operating officer, a woman known for her logistical genius and no-nonsense approach. She lacked Richard's slick charisma, but possessed something the company now desperately needed: credibility. Her first act as CEO was not to issue a press release or speak to investors. It was to request a meeting with Dr. Imani Cole. She didn't ask for a video conference. She asked to meet in person at a location of Dr. Cole's choosing. Imani agreed and suggested her own office. She wanted the new leadership to come to her, to enter her space on her terms. When Diane Morrison walked into the AeroLease Dynamics headquarters, there was no entourage, no team of lawyers. She came alone. She was a tall, stern-looking woman in her 50s, her expression one of weary determination rather than panic. Imani met her in the boardroom, the same room where she had orchestrated the airline's downfall. Olivia Chen was present, but stood silently to the side, a sentinel guarding the throne. Dr. Cole Diane began foregoing the handshake and getting straight to the point. I'm not here to apologize again. Words are meaningless at this point. I'm here to ask what it takes to rebuild. Not just our flight schedule, but the trust that was shattered. You've exposed a rot, and I am now in charge of cleaning it out. I need to know if you believe it's even possible. Her directness and humility were a stark contrast to Richard Sterling's blustering arrogance. Imani listened, her gaze analytical, searching. The possibility of rebuilding Ms. Morrison, Imani replied, her voice measured, depends entirely on the foundation you choose to build upon. Firing people and cancelling contracts is not rebuilding, it's demolition. It was necessary, but it's the easy part. What comes next? That's what I came here to ask you, Diane admitted. You didn't do all of this just to punish us. That could have been accomplished with a lawsuit. This was about forcing a fundamental change. I need to understand your vision for what that change looks like. This was the moment Imani had been waiting for. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about reconstruction. My vision, Imani said, leaning forward, is a system where a person's dignity is not a variable, where the color of their skin does not automatically make them a subject of suspicion. A culture of safety has to mean safety for everyone, not just safety from some outside threat at the expense of the passengers you claim to serve. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Here is my proposal. It is not negotiable. Transatlantic will partner with my philanthropic foundation, the Cole Initiative for Equity, to fund, develop, and implement a new standard of training. It will not be a 1-hour sensitivity webinar. It will be a comprehensive top-to-bottom cultural overhaul for all your partners starting at JFK. It will be called the Dignity in Transit Program. Imani continued, her voice gaining intensity. It will involve rigorous psychological screening for security personnel to identify prejudice. It will involve training based on real-world scenarios, teaching de-escalation that focuses on mutual respect, not just compliance. And it will be overseen by an independent review board, which I will chair for the first 2 years. Diane listened, her expression unreadable. Imani was asking for control, for oversight, for a deep and permanent role in the airline's core operations. Furthermore, Imani added, delivering the final piece, Transatlantic will fund a $100 million compensation fund to be administered by the board for the 12 other victims your previous leadership and security partners ignored. Their stories must be acknowledged, and their injuries, both emotional and psychological, must be addressed. Your airline will be the agent of that healing. It was an audacious set of demands. It went far beyond any normal business negotiation. Imani was dictating social policy, demanding financial restitution, and inserting herself into their corporate governance. Diane Morrison was silent for a full minute. She looked at Imani, then at the city skyline outside the window, then back at Imani. The board will see this as an overreach, Diane said softly. They'll call it extortion. Let them, Imani replied calmly. They can have that debate while their planes continue to rust on the tarmac. Or you can go back to them and tell them this is the price of flying again. Not just the price of leasing my aircraft, but the price of earning back a shred of public trust. This is the opportunity to turn the worst scandal in your history into your most profound legacy. You can become the airline that got it right because you were forced to. A slow nod from Diane Morrison was the only reply Imani needed. The deal was done. 2 weeks later, the first transatlantic airways flight, a gleaming Airbus A350 owned by AeroLease Dynamics, took off from JFK bound for London. Before the flight, a new ritual took place at the gate. Diane Morrison, standing side by side with Dr. Imani Cole, addressed the passengers and the press. They announced the grounding was over. They announced their unprecedented partnership and the launch of the Dignity in Transit program. Imani Cole didn't just get an apology. She didn't just get 2 men fired. She forced an entire industry to confront its demons. She had absorbed a hateful comment and transformed its toxic energy into a force for systemic change. The reckoning had been severe, the consequences devastating. But from the ashes of one man's prejudice and a corporation's arrogance, a new, more just foundation was beginning to be laid. 6 months had passed since the day Dr. Imani Cole brought an airline to a standstill. The autumn chill had given way to the biting winds of a New York winter, but inside a cavernous training facility near JFK, a different kind of climate change was underway. This was the headquarters of the Dignity in Transit program, an initiative born of fire and fury, now meticulously taking shape. Imani Cole sat at the back of the room, an observer in the world she had forced into existence. She wasn't there as a CEO or a victim, but as the chair of the review board. Her presence a silent, constant reminder of the stakes. At the front of the room, beside the lead facilitator, stood Diane Morrison, the interim CEO of Transatlantic, now confirmed as permanent, made it a point to attend the opening session of every new training cohort. Her presence sent an unequivocal message. This was not a PR stunt. This was the new doctrine. Today's group was comprised of seasoned security personnel, men and women, with a decade or more on the job. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, resentment, and weary cynicism. One officer in particular, a man named Mike Kowalski, with a thick mustache and arms crossed defensively over his chest, seemed to radiate contempt. To him, this was a mandatory re-education camp punishment for the sins of one bad apple. The facilitator, a sharp sociologist hired by the Cole Initiative, began. "We're not here to talk about feelings. We're here to talk about threat assessment. And for decades we have ignored a critical vulnerability in our system, the threat of losing public trust." Mike scoffed just loud enough to be heard. "My job is to stop bombs, not to worry about if someone's feelings get hurt." The facilitator nodded unfazed. "You're right, Officer Kowalski. Your primary job is security. But what if I told you that treating people with dignity makes you better at your job? That prejudice is a blind spot. When you're focused on a person's skin color or their clothing, you might miss the actual threat right next to them, who doesn't fit your stereotype." He then gestured to a series of sophisticated VR headsets lining a nearby table. "Today, you're all going to walk a mile in someone else's shoes." Literally. Each officer was fitted with a headset. The scenario was titled JFK Checkpoint 4B. When Mike put his on, the world around him dissolved. He was no longer in a training room. He was standing in a photorealistic simulation of the security checkpoint. But he wasn't himself. He looked down and saw slender, dark-skinned hands, a navy blue pantsuit, and an elegant watch on his wrist. He was inhabiting the avatar of Dr. Imani Cole. The simulation began. An officer, a digital clone of Frank Gallagher, with his signature sneer, stepped in front of him. The audio, taken from anonymized transcripts of real incidents, was piped directly into his ears. He heard the flat, dismissive tone. He was directed to the sterile glass cubicle. He was forced to unpack his briefcase, his virtual hands fumbling with the latches as the simulated officer's questions became more and more accusatory. The program was brilliant in its cruelty. It used biometric feedback. As the officer's questions became more aggressive, Mike's own heart rate, monitored by the headset, would cause the virtual world to feel more claustrophobic, the sounds of the terminal more jarring. He felt the slow burn humiliation, the invasive scrutiny of his personal items, the feeling of being presumed guilty. And then came the line delivered with cold venom by the digital Frank. "We don't trust people like you in this part of the airport." Mike ripped the headset off his face, pale and beaded with sweat. The training room came rushing back into focus. He looked across at his colleagues who were having similar reactions. The cynical bravado had vanished, replaced by a stunned, uncomfortable silence. For the first time, it wasn't an abstract concept. He had felt it. "Prejudice isn't just wrong," the facilitator said gently into the quiet room. "It's a tactical error. It creates an enemy where there is none, and it makes you blind to the real dangers. That feeling, that sense of injustice and anger, is what we put into the world. Dr. Cole was powerful enough to weaponize it. The next person might not be, but the trust will still be broken. And that is a security failure. Mike Kowalski didn't say another word for the rest of the day. He just listened. The echo of Imani's stand was reverberating far beyond JFK. At an aviation industry conference in Chicago that month, a panel of CEOs discussed the future of airport security. The moderator coined a new term that was catching on: the transatlantic precedent. Rival airlines, terrified of a similar crisis, were scrambling to implement their own versions of the Dignity in Transit program. DEI consultants were suddenly the hottest commodity in the aviation sector. An industry that had been inert for decades was now locked in an arms race of accountability. In a quiet, dimly lit bar in Greenwich, Connecticut, Richard Sterling swirled the ice in his scotch. He had been trying to get a meeting with a former colleague, a man who now sat on the board of a major logistics firm. The colleague had been polite but firm, shaking his hand before making a hasty exit. Richard's name was Poison. He was the man who'd lost a war with a single customer. Two young fintech entrepreneurs were talking loudly at the table next to him. "You have to use the Cole doctrine," one said to the other. "Don't just sue them for breach of contract. Hit them where their brand lives. Leverage their hypocrisy. It's a total takedown." Richard flinched. They had named his failure after his victor. It was his legacy now to be the textbook example of how not to lead. He drained his scotch, the bitter taste a perfect match for the ashes of his career. Not all actors in the drama, however, were left in ruins. One evening, as a training session wound down, Imani saw Kevin Russo. The young whistleblower hadn't been fired or ostracized. Diane Morrison, in one of her first acts as CEO, had personally overseen his protection. He was given a promotion and a significant bonus funded directly by Transatlantic, and was now a valued junior consultant on the new training protocol, his on-the-ground experience proving invaluable. He approached Imani, his demeanor respectful and a little shy. "Dr. Cole, I just wanted to say thank you. Not for the promotion, but for doing what you did. You gave a voice to a lot of people who didn't have one." Imani offered him a rare, warm smile. "You're the one who deserves the thanks, Kevin. You took a great risk when you had nothing to gain. Integrity like that is the foundation. Everything else is built on. Don't ever lose it." Later that night, Imani stood with Diane Morrison at the vast window of the training facility, looking out at the glittering expanse of the airport. The runways were alive with the lights of departing and arriving planes, many of them hers, many of them belonging to Transatlantic. The partnership was working. The airline's recovery was slow but steady, and their new brand identity as the leader in ethical security was paradoxically making them stronger. "The board is still complaining about the cost," Diane said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "But passenger satisfaction scores are up for the first time in 5 years, and staff turnover in our security partners has dropped. It seems dignity is actually good for business." Imani watched a transatlantic jet gracefully lift into the night sky. The sight no longer triggered the memory of humiliation. It was a symbol of a battle, one a testament to the power of a single, unyielding conviction. The hateful words of one man had been the spark, but the fire that followed had not just burned down the old structure. It had forged something new and stronger in its place. The echo of that day would continue to ripple outwards a constant reminder that sometimes to rebuild the world, you first have to be willing to bring it to a complete and utter stop. In the end, this story isn't just about the epic fallout from 4 hateful words. It's a testament to the immense power of holding your ground. Dr. Imani Cole proved that one person's refusal to accept injustice can be more powerful than a fleet of aircraft or a billion-dollar balance sheet. She didn't just demand respect. She strategically dismantled the systems that denied it to her and so many others. The consequences weren't just about punishment. They were about reconstruction. The airline wasn't just brought to its knees. It was forced to stand up again, stronger, more aware, and more accountable than ever before. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about the power you wield, but the principles you refuse to sacrifice. What did you think of Imani's ultimate move? Was it justice or the most brilliant business play ever? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true life dramas.